In this question, we have a Lewis structure here showing CF4, and we're trying to figure out what type of hybridization is happening and if this molecule has free rotation or not. So the first question asking about hybridization, that's basically this idea that when an atom starts to form bonds, some of the orbitals combine together. So usually in a valence electron shell, we'll have an s orbital and we'll have 3 p orbitals. So based on this, since each of these orbitals can contain up to 2 electrons, we might expect that we could form one bond using that s orbital, and then that we could form one more bond using each of these p orbitals. So based on that, we'd expect carbon to be able to form 4 bonds, but we'd expect one of them to be an S type and 3 of them to be P types. So we'd probably expect them to be different from each other. However, what we find when we actually look at the bonds in a real molecule is that all 4 of the bonds are identical. And what that tells us that instead of having our s orbital and our 3 p orbitals, something strange happens and they actually kind of combine to form these 4 orbitals that are all the same. They all have a hybridized sp nature. And when we have one s and 3 p that hybridize together, we call them sp3 orbitals, showing that they're made up of like a quarter s and 3/4 p in kind of what they're made up of. So that's what happens in this case here. Here we have 4 electron domains. So we know that we have 4 equivalent kind of areas around our central atom. And based on that, we have all 4 of these orbitals, the s and the 3 separate p orbitals, combined to form these sp3 orbitals. So that'll answer our question here. We had 4 electron domains and our hybridization was sp3. However, the hybridization is different depending on how many electron domains you have. So we can do a little table here. So the number of electron domains, I'll call them EDs. If we had 4 electron domains, we found that our hybridization was sp3, since the s and 3 of the p's came together to form 4 equivalent electron domains. Now, if instead we only had 3 electron domains, let's say that one of these wasn't there and another was a double bond, then our carbon would only have 3 electron domains around it, and we still find that this would be a trigonal planar structure. They're 3 kind of equivalent bonds. So here we only need the s and 2 of the p's to combine together to make those 3 equivalent spaces. So it would be an sp2 hybridization with one of the s's and 2 of the p's combining together. And then we'd be left over one of those p orbitals, which would then be used to make the double bond part of the bond. Similarly, if we had 2 electron domains only, then we'd only need 2 of those sp hybridized orbitals. So there'd be the sp type made of one s and one p, and would be left with 2 p orbitals remaining that could be used to make 2 double bonds. So in this one, we had 4 electron domains, and therefore we had sp3 hybridization. The next question asks about sigma bonds and pi bonds. So sigma bonds, those are the type that are made from either s orbitals or sp hybridized orbitals. And due to the shape of these orbitals, sigma bonds aren't very rigid. They can be rotated around. So if you imagine we have 2 atoms like this, they could kind of rotate in these directions around that bond. And any single bond contains a sigma bond. So it's easy to figure out how many sigma bonds we have here because we've got 4 single bonds. And here we have 0 pi bonds because pi bonds are made from p orbitals. And pi bonds occur in double and triple bonds. So since we only have single bonds here, we only have sigma bonds. If instead this one wasn't here and we had a double bond here, we'd have 3 sigma bonds, and then also we'd have a pi bond because of that double bond. And pi bonds are different from sigma bonds because of the shape of the p orbitals. When we have a double bond in there, it actually prevents any rotation from happening. So double bonds or triple bonds, because they contain pi bonds, cannot rotate those molecules. So in this question, our molecule does have free rotation. Yes, it does, because there are no pi bonds present. So to summarize, single bonds contain 1 sigma bond and 0 pi bonds. So single bonds allow free rotation because they don't contain any pi bonds, and pi bonds are the only type that don't allow free rotation. Double bonds are made up of 1 sigma bond and 1 pi bond. So double bonds do not allow free rotation since they contain pi bonds which do not allow free rotation. And finally, triple bonds contain 1 sigma bond and 2 pi bonds. So triple bonds also do not allow free rotation since they contain pi bonds which do not allow free rotation.